Well, first of all, I want to thank Robert, Cheryl, and Carolyn for these really nice contributions, donations to the cause here, and I really appreciate these kinds of comments. Carolyn says, "Thank you so much for your YouTube videos, your insights and explanations. I've found what I, as an aspiring artist, have been searching for years. Kind regards, Carolyn of the Netherlands." So thank you for that note. I know you're giving me money um, because of the value, at least at the moment, it's bringing you. And if it has no other value than entertainment, I'm not probably the best guy at that. But yeah, these insights, it's one of those things you can underrate the value of the atelier training, which is this conversation you have closely with someone, sort of side by side, day after day after day after day for years, and it just seeps into you, and before you know it, you've taken it completely for granted. Another chilly night, by the way, in my studio, in my library here. But let's get right away into Devan's question. And this is Devan. I think it's Devan, but I'm not sure this isn't Darian, so I have to be corrected on this. I just caught this at this very second. I haven't had time to go back and I can't lose time right now because I have a composition class coming right up after this. So time is of the essence. Devan says, I would be interested in a discussion about practical approaches to field sketches and studies. So now you talk about sketches and studies, right? This is a big deal in terms of what we do, in terms of what all painters do. You see all the notebooks full of drawings. For example, when is it time to look at compositional considerations versus studying architectural details? I'm just using architecture as an example. I have a hard time understanding when there's the need for more careful study and when it's time to move into working out the broader compositional aspects. Some of Sargent's watercolors of Roman architecture is a good example of this. Some of his paintings are really nothing more than closely cropped architectural studies, but it seems as if he got a better command of a given structure. As he got a better command of a given structure, the compositions got larger and more involved, including broader views as opposed to the early detail studies. Yeah, this is a fascinating question on a number of levels, but I think what I want to address, and what I prepared myself to address actually, is just the question of sketching and the various things that you are after when you're sketching. And you should be able to make up your mind about why you're doing what when. Of course, if you're a student, and I'm not going to show images, if you're a student, you are doing those drawings in the classroom, for example, of figures, and you're doing very careful copies of the figure with the idea of studying two things. One is the figure, and the other is drawing. Okay, so you're at the beginning of your career. You're trying to learn to draw, and you're studying the figure. Now, you could argue if you're working in my world, you're learning to see the visual impression. You learn that, and I try to incorporate that with everything we do, so that it's not just drawing objects, which isn't a bad thing in the sense of making something as an object and learning to model and all those things. But that's, again, those are the sciences. I talk about the science of light on objects. You definitely are studying that on some level. You need to. But your focus is going to be something in particular, and your drawings are going to show it. So we'll just show. I couldn't find any what I call detail studies, as you suggest, Devan. I really hope that's you, Devan, and not Darian. Maybe I should just quit using your name until I know. But so here are three watercolors by Sargent, all with architectural stuff, and the fountain on the right, which I didn't check dates on these things. It could be in a relatively earlier one, but you can see what he's doing isn't in any way a detailed study, right? These are paintings, first of all. They're pictures. And they're pictures, they're impressionist pictures. They're visual order pictures. You could call them, well, the early use of the word tonalist, but I mean, in the Monet family, you could say they're value studies as much as anything else. But the one on the right particularly looks like it has a ton of Monet in it. The earlier ones in Italy, it's clear he's working with a limited palette and a limited concept of, or a limited reach, shall we say, in terms of color. But I just want you to observe that these things are impressionist works of a visual of a well, let's just turn it the other way around. Let's just say they're renderings of a visual impression more than they're architectural studies. It doesn't look like Sargent had any inclination to go in there and do architectural studies per se. I'm going to show you, this is Ruskin, who was, of course, quite some time earlier. But Ruskin is doing these studies, and they are literally architectural studies. He looks like he's trying to understand the beauty of these, and the particular details of the alignment of leaves and that sort of thing, and placement of shapes within, as an architectural study. Well, that's studying architecture, right? And there's lots to be gained. I mean, study architecture, whatever amuses you, study it. But this is somewhat more in the camp of what Da Vinci is doing, you might say like a scientist. He's studying, he's now here, you can see he's studying flowers. I wish I'd blown that left one up further. And I'm going to go down and get my noisemaker, my color spotter, yeah, there we go, in case I decide to use these. But you can see that these are, well, maybe I'll start using them right away, but right like around this upper left corner here, look at that careful study of the shape of the leaf. He's, if you look close at all the kind of stuff he does when he's in this category, he's acting like a scientist. He's studying the leaf. It was funny, Layton was praised by a botanist, I believe, for having drawn the leaves of an olive tree, and he said they are botanically correct. Well, I mean, that wouldn't be in the same class as what you're looking at here. This guy's making no attempt to be botanically correct. I mean, he's making the shapes do what they do visually. And to that degree, it will have something of like, for example, those trees on the right, those poplars, I would believe you'd call them, yeah, that's actually the wrong name. I've forgotten the name of those trees. But in any case, they undoubtedly have the shapes, and would be said by some tree scientist to say, oh, I can tell you what kind of tree that is, right? Well, that's not what, Da Vinci is doing that, but Da Vinci has this mixed motive all the time. He's studying like a scientist. He's actually doing, when he cuts open the body, all of a sudden it's nothing to do with what you're going to show anybody. He's cutting open the insides of a womb, for crying out loud, and showing you the layers of skin and of fleshy, I would say balloons or sort of sacs or whatever. I mean, he's doing this kind of work, and he's analyzing the muscles, and separating the bones from the muscles and all that sort of stuff. He's like a scientist at that point, right? So he's studying, in that sense, you'd say he's studying anatomy. Well, here he's studying plants, and that's fine. And that's an isolated study unto itself, right? And you can study anything. You do the anatomy of trees, the anatomy of plants, the anatomy of animals, whatever. Study anatomy if you like. But that's what these are. These are close studies of anatomy, and they don't appear to have any purpose in any particular picture. Now, when you get to Da Vinci, when you get to the other aspect of Sargent, is making a picture this is an imaginative picture. Those other paintings we just looked at, the watercolors, even though they look like they have a fair amount of preliminary pencil marks on them, on all the watercolors I've seen, so there'd be, as it were, an underdrawing. These pictures here are, this El Jaleo, this is an imaginative painting where all the pieces, studies were done for all the different parts. And you can see he's doing more close studies to really get a fine version of what he's going to do with this head. But there's any number of studies, after study after study. Imaginative painters can fill a wall with the studies for a single picture. Imaginative painting has that particular need, right? You have to draw something, then you're going to draw it. You have to actually draw it up with the information, that's the drawing information. Then you're going to stick it onto your panel. All the individual parts in the drawings, all those little parts will be pasted on there. Each one of them will be worked up, and you might then go to grisaille, or you might not go to grisaille. He obviously doesn't. But you see that these are different kinds of studies for different purposes. Now, a study like this, he's trying to figure out the pose, it looks like. He's trying to figure out the lighting. He's probably seeing people in a place and just doing sketches. Or he may be hiring models. More likely in this case with the paint, he probably is hiring models. By the way, there are definitely some efficiencies in using a toned canvas. It's not an impressionist mindset because the tone will be a factor in your finish. And there are certain paintings by Metcalfe, the American impressionist, that have tone. But most of them ultimately don't. They might have a slightly less than white gray tone, but it won't be anything like this rich stuff typically, although we've all explored all that stuff. Anyway, you can see all these series of studies for all the different parts of this picture, some of which then he works up even more closely, and then he puts the pieces together. I think I saw one where he had the drawings put together and a grid from which he could copy, which is fairly typical, and I didn't provide that for you, but a drawing tracing is a different kind of drawing, right, for a different purpose, right? And it has to do with that transferring job. Today we can do stuff with the computer and stuff and reduce images really nicely and things they couldn't do. So the gridding thing may not be as necessary today as it used to be. That's another story. So let's keep talking about the various uses of sketching. And I'm going to point you one more time at Sargent. In the bottom left corner, this is what are the names of these, the sisters? I knew I'd forget that, but this is a sketch that's in several of the Ormond books. I'm sorry, it's in the Ormond books. But it's a sketch, it's a preliminary sketch, what I would call a thumbnail, which is the grand overview of the idea of the picture. Basic elements and what they're up to together about where they land within the frame. So there's always a frame around that kind of thing and a couple blobs of objects. He wants the one woman higher and to the right and the next one down lower. And he wants this big old image painting, whatever it is, in there, but he's actually just showing you the rough. Now, that's a kind of sketching, right? That's the thing you should learn to do. Learn to do thumbnails. Learn to do values thumbnails. Learn to do mainline thumbnails or whatever you want to call this conceptual thumbnail. But you can see that he's also doing what may as well be called a thumbnail, but this is a figure grouping or a storytelling, a search for the organization of the players to tell the story, and a searching out of the gesture, right? But he seems to have pretty much resolved the gesture unless he's doing it right there on the spot, which he could very well be doing. This is all Rembrandt, by the way, the rest of these. These appear to be studies for expression, and Rembrandt is like the colossal, maybe as good as anybody in the history of painting, making you feel like you're in the soul of that person. Like he must have had this incredible empathetic soul, Rembrandt. But these are studies of those kinds of things, whether they're for pictures or whether they're his workup. And again, these are the two ways of using drawing. You are doing this for a picture, or you're doing this to study what? In his case, it feels like he's studying expression. Now, down on the right here is a worked up, and we used to do these with Gamel, a worked up, you may as well call it a full-scale values study. I don't think these are very large at all, by the way. And the ones we did, the biggest one might have been 4 inches across. It might have been similar to what you can't say what you're seeing on your screen. But these are actually, and Rembrandt is just full of these actual landscapes that he never turned into paintings. I mean, just a ton of them. And this is a really, really useful exercise. So this is, again, though, in the class of actually doing a composition, a sketch now that is a composition, right? And you go out there into the field and work this up with no color or anything like that. But if you understand the visual order, you can actually really present, the sense of light and all that sort of stuff, even in a chalk study. Now, the picture on the left, this is Michelangelo. The picture on the left is a study for a painting. In fact, all of these appear to be studies for paintings. This one, which looks like I'm squished, oh boy. this study is based on the river god. I want to tell you it's Greek, but I think it's not known whether it's Greek or not. But there's a sculpture of what he called the river god, or what's in the books called the river god, and it's a stretched out figure that he eventually does a version of for the creation. Where you see that great image of God coming down, reaching out to Adam. And so this is Adam at creation, but you can see he's figuring out a composition here, or studying up forms and things, because he's making the figure up out of his head, right? And the same thing with all the other ones here. He's doing now. This is a series of studies for the purposes of finding either finding the gesture he wants, or studying up a certain thing that he's already figured out that he wants, and he's studying it up over here, much like he's done with the hand over here, and I think the foot or the toes. Yeah, the toes to the right there. You can see that these are studied up versions of something that itself is a study for a painting, which is it's a search for the gesture, but he appears to have already resolved that, so now it appears to be rather a workup, which he then uses as the basis for all the drawing in the painting, except for whatever he resolves to do differently. But this is all Sistine ceiling type stuff. Now, in the case of now, you can plainly see in the case of Lord Layton, he's doing a series of marks here, trying to figure out gestures for a picture. You can even see his sometimes isolating certain things into a frame. Now, that's again the compositional question. That's one of those kinds of things you do, scribbling around, sketching, as you call it. So these various purposes, right? Find the pose, find the pose, find the pose. And then, of course, the studies, again, this is Millet. I better not jump over there. I better go to this one. See, once you have the figure figured out and you've studied up even further, and you'll see that Layton will actually have a figure fully traced onto a piece of paper, and then he will, and many people do this. But remember, this is imaginative painting. This is not Impressionism. Even though certain aspects of our seeing might have an Impressionist tendency because of their capacity to see, and see values well and things. But it's not Impressionist at any point. It's rendering of an object, or in this case, the drapery on a figure. It was said about Ang, who did the same kind of stuff, that he eschewed the lay figure, and then people said they found him actually using lay figure. Just means like a mannequin, a stuffed doll or something like that you put drapery on and just literally use it to copy. And by the way, Layton was a complete, he just studied up drapery like to the nth degree. He really worked it up. Millet's hands here obviously studies for a picture. Look how beautifully that's made in the sense of where it lays on the leg and all that. It's very, very classic in terms of atypical is a better word to say it, not classic. It's rather typical of our behavior. So. The way you would see a hand. But so these appear to probably be done from life. And this is funny because he says he didn't work from life, so they may not be. He worked largely from memory. So this is an interesting question, whether these are actually rendered, which way they're rendered, But they have a feeling of, there's a lot of information here that looks like it must have been seen. And that's a big, interesting question. I should have used some Rubens stuff, but I think we have plenty of material here. Again, this is in the class. Now, again, when you're doing these kinds of works right here, Degas is an imaginative painter. He's not, and he never was a person per se who fundamentally thought of his job as going out there and painting what he saw at large. He was putting pictures together out of pieces. So he would naturally do these worked up studies. This is, I believe, Manet, a study of Manet for a picture, for a portrait. And these are studies of legs and different things, again, parts, for some of his ballet pictures. And this is a very early one where he's setting up the drapery for the Semiramis, I believe this one is for. Or is it? I'd be hard-pressed actually to remember the name of that one. So you can see what he's doing. These are studies. Now, plenty of us, and I think you've seen maybe you haven't yet, have done studies of the drapery for fun, right? Or for the purpose of studying drapery. Well, this isn't for the purposes of studying drapery. This is a picture at work. But so he's studying up drapery just as we showed you a minute ago with Layton. This is the same kind of idea. He's got a figure. He's got probably a nude there somewhere, and then he's got either a lay figure or some other way of placing this drapery on the model. But he's clearly using actual references to do it. So, and then here are all these studies. Now, again, if you're an imaginative painter, all these things, and I'm sure that's what you're looking at when you ask these questions. So again, when you study as a student, you may be studying painting, literally how to beautifully paint the form of a leg. You may be studying how to hit color notes, and that's one reason you might do a section of something, or how to study. You might be studying paint, or you might just be working up the gesture, the figure, or the drawing, trying to get the drawing in hand, so you can then transfer it. And it looks like he would have done that, transferred over to here, and then turned the whole thing into paint, right? But so you can see these studies. Is this the Saint Symphorien? I can't remember which painting this is. And again, as I said, he would do this with portraits, and so there are whole walls full of studies for the portraits. So again, put this back into a perspective. What I would recommend everyone do, by the way, is study drawing this way. Go look at drawings. Go look at drawings online, or just look at the drawings of an individual painter like Layton, and notice what are the purpose of this drawing compared to this drawing, compared to this drawing, because they're all different purposes for drawings. And so I think when you say sketching, you mean that. You mean drawings for study. You use the word studies. But so there's some drawing is done to study the figures, as I said, some to study drawing, some to study the pose, to find, as they say, search out a pose. And then some, of course, to work out the details for the painting before you transfer it and start working in color. So, but go on like that. The thumbnail is its own thing, right? And like the one I showed you with Sargent and the what the heck is the name of those sisters? I almost had it there. Now, this is I've showed you this before. This is the Oyster Gatherers by Sargent. And this is my study. So here I am sketching, right? You'd say, right? What am I sketching? Well, I'm studying this figure with the idea of trying to understand how much he's using the visual order, and whether or not my way of thinking will produce something adequately like his, or whether it resembles that way of working, like his results in an efficient way, right? And of course, I find that that's one of those reasons I can say to you that basically what I'm doing, what Sargent's doing mechanically, and the Boston School are pretty much of the same ilk, right? And the same thing as Zorn, for example. And a lot of painters. I mean, it's not special to these guys. But so this is a use, though, of the sketch medium. This is a study, right? Now you can say I'm pushing the study. I am, because I'm trying to be very precise about the relationships of edges and effects to other edges and effects in different places across this panel here. And I'm noticing whether I'm actually matching his, and I've noticed passages on his that are less drawn, less painted. So I'm assuming he's working in visual order, so I do that too. And I find that the whole thing begins to come together nicely. But that's just me studying from a painting. So that's a different use of the sketch. And you can do that. You might have a pencil in your hand when you're doing that. You might be studying, if you're really thinking about doing imaginative work, you might very well be drawing this figure grouping or the entire grouping just to get a feeling. By putting your time in, just doing this in pencil, just doing the figures in pencil, you begin to get a feeling of the placement of figures in relation to each other and become better at it, or to see what these guys are doing in terms of the placement on the floor, the furniture arrangement, what I call it. So there are plenty of reasons to do those kinds of sketchings. I should have brought in probably a Jerome, because that guy was doing what you'd call literally workups of architecture. I don't think I see anything in Sargent that suggests he's ever actually doing that. Maybe when he was a student he did, but I can't say that I've seen anything in the broad work, look at his work in the grand mass of his work. Now, so this is a study, a full impressionist, big impression, full framed study looking for the composition. So this is a sketch looking for the composition before he ever goes to paint. And he might, again, very well have gridded that up. Should I look at it? Yeah, he did. He's drawn cross lines on it. So he's gridded it up to transfer. Obviously, he wandered a little bit so he transferred it, and then he did whatever he felt like. He actually quickly got away from the exact look of this one and got to something that's quite different. Yeah, so, but there it is again. That's a use of sketch. That's a sketch looking for it, but it's for a particular painting, right? And you're trying to find out what your composition is doing. So if you're a student, though, you might be focusing, for example, at some point you just do heads, right? You're in the portrait room and you might just do heads. What would you be studying, right? You'd be studying painting, the management of form. You'd be trying to develop your skills in that direction. You'd be studying the human head, but what your focus is what your drawing's going to look different depending on what your focus is. Let me put it that way. And so that's why I suggest you look at many different kinds of drawings. I hope this begins to answer your questions. Devan, I'm going to go back and review your point again and see that I didn't miss something noticeable. I'd be interested in discussion about practical approaches to field sketches and studies. Well, that'd be a different question. But then when you started talking about these things, you didn't really say approaches. You're really talking about why do this when. But in terms of the approaches, there are different approaches. There are outline approaches and there are impressionist approaches, just for starters. But I think that's not what you're asking. I have a hard time understanding when there's the need for more careful study and when it's time to move into work out the broader compositional aspects. The way you're speaking there, it sounds like you are inclined to make a picture out of the pieces and find the architecture of the within the frame afterwards. And if you're an imaginative painter, you don't have much choice, although you probably want to project out there some bigger idea, and which you'll find Layton is an example, maybe even in some what we've already showed you, where you can see he's searching for the bigger picture while he's also searching for the gesture on different sketches. But we don't actually work that way. We work from the outside in. So our thinking is organized around what is the great compositional thing. So that's when you'd be saying, oh, the thumbnail, what is the concept of this picture, right? So you have a rectangle and you'd have, the two figures going like this across with a whatever's window frame in the middle or whatever. As a rough, crude statement to yourself of what holding on, so you can hold on to that basic idea you have. So that's a big, big difference, though. The Impressionist really doesn't piece pictures together. It doesn't mean you can't work impressionistically like Sargent does, and that's the reason I show that Sargent, the El Jaleo, because you can piece pictures together. But I suspect that you'll find even in that one that he's already figured out what the design's going to be before he starts gluing people in. And that's a thinking that I think you're going to find is way more effective. Than even in imaginative work from pieces. You do all that big stuff first. So it's time to moving into the working out the broader compositional aspects. I think you're not doing that. Now, if you don't know what your gestures, the figures are and all that sort of stuff, it's one thing, but still, you don't even know where they're going to go on the page, how big, how important they are, and that sort of thing. You don't know necessarily much, right? For example, if the figures are going to be big and dominate the page, it's going to be a whole different compositional idea. Right. If they're going to be little figures, is it a figure with landscapes or is it a landscape with figures question? So that's just more grist to the mill. Have your thoughts go that way. Think about that for a bit. Some of Sargent's watercolors, yeah. So I think I answered that. So all right, guys. Thank you again for those sweet donations, and I still haven't asked my producer, Whitaker, whether he wants me to use his first name. Some of you were saying you thought I should do that. So I apologize for you for not getting that far, but maybe having heard this, he'll answer me. He'll get back to me. All right, so we did that in under 30 minutes. If I shut up right now, we can succeed. So thank you for your donations. Please continue to share as much as you can. Subscribe, of course, and as by the way, in terms of subscriptions, just remember, we're still trying to get to that place or some landmark, maybe 2,300 or 2,500 subscriptions, and we're going to do another something live. And one of these days, I do know I have to get you a demonstration again of something. If someone wants to actually project a particular, maybe you've already said it, but if you would just refresh me, if you want a particular demonstration of a particular thing that can fit into something not really long, please tell me what it might be, something that maybe you're playing with our way of working. and you want to know something happens right here that you can't figure out, maybe I can do that. So consider that, okay? And send me some specifics. I'll see what I can do. Uh, and and again, yeah, as I said, share and keep sharing and and all the rest. Commenting, yes, that was that part. Okay. All right, folks. Great. See you next time.